Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement. Now, in case you missed it, you might like to know that the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, she just informed us that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is going to cause global food shortages. And while she assures us that we're not expecting food shortages here in the U.S., the Biden administration is anticipating an impact on places like Africa, the Middle East, as well as Southeast Asia. Here's how Jen Psaki put it the other day, and I quote, "While we're not expecting a food shortage here at home, we do anticipate that higher energy fertilizer, wheat, and corn prices could impact the price of growing and purchasing critical food supplies for countries around the world." Now, as we consider this statement, I can't help but to wonder how, the Biden administration has come to this conclusion, that the conflict there in Ukraine won't affect critical food supplies here in the U.S. I'll remind you, this is the same administration that has assured us that the rising cost of gas here in America, the rising cost that we're currently experiencing at the pump, well, that's Russia's fault. That's Putin's fault. and listen, if that's truly the case, well, then it only stands to reason then that Russia's decision to end their fertilizer exports will then also impact critical food supplies here in the U.S. You might not know this, but the combined fertilizer exports of Russia and Belarus, this accounts for about 40% of the global market, and that's huge. And so when Russia decides to stop exporting fertilizer for the remainder of 2022, that decision has impacted the global supply of fertilizer. And now, fertilizer around the world has been immediately reduced in a major way. And so here's how Josh Linville of StoneX Group describes the situation that we find ourselves in. And I quote him here. "Russia is a major exporter across all of the major fertilizers." And then after presenting us with, statistics and percentages, Linville then sums it all up by declaring this. He says, "Losing Russian exports is a very big deal. I don't care where you are in the earth. It matters to you." In other words, this decision of Russia to stop exporting fertilizer, this will not only impact Africa and the Middle East and Southeast Asia, but it's also going to impact the United States of America. And the reason why is simply because of supply and demand economics. As the global supply of fertilizer is drastically reduced by Russia's decision, well, the demand on the remaining suppliers, well, that increases. And as a result, the cost of fertilizer will also increase. From this, farmers everywhere are now being forced to pay more for the fertilizer they need, which is a cost that will ultimately be seen at the grocery store by summer. Now, the good news is that the USDA just announced plans to put $250 million towards American-made fertilizers in order to give U.S. farmers more choices in the marketplace. And so just think about that for a moment. The same administration that used executive orders in an attempt to force us to take the Fauci ouchie, they're now assuring us that they're going to fix it. They're going to fix the fertilizer situation with, more government money and more regulations. It kind of sounds like another step towards a socialistic system by which the government controls the means of production and the allocation of economic resources. And if that's the case, well, then it's not difficult to imagine how this is all going to turn out. Just look at any country where socialistic leaders controlled the means of food production, and you'll soon see that socialism typically results in starvation. For example, just back up to 1999 when Robert Mugabe, the Marxist dictator of Zimbabwe, initiated a land reform program which nationalized all privately held farmland. And this program was catastrophic as it caused the second highest hyperinflation in recorded history. The unemployment rate skyrocketed to 94% as thousands of Zimbabweans died of hunger and disease. And from this we see socialism typically results in starvation. Wherever socialism has been tried, it's failed. It's failed to produce the utopia that socialistic leaders have promised. They come along and they make these huge promises, but it always ends up in starvation. Whether we're talking about the Soviet Union of 1917 or Venezuela back in 2015 until today, socialism eventually devolves into starvation as the government begins to ration what little resources are left. And with that being the case, we should be extremely concerned about the current state of our federal government. And one reason why is because President Biden appointed Bernie Sanders, the self-identified socialist, as the leader of the United States Senate Committee on the Budget. That's right. We have a socialist responsible for drafting Congress's annual budget plan, and we have a socialist in charge of monitoring action on the budget for the federal government. And let's not forget that this so-called socialist is a career politician who somehow acquired a net worth of $3 million, all the while serving as the senator of Vermont. Yeah, the man who wants to stop people from becoming billionaires doesn't really seem to have a problem enjoying his financial status as a multimillionaire. Seems like a contradiction. And it's sad that the political progressives appear to be easily duped by these American Marxists who promise free college, which is going to be paid by taxing the rich. And while all of this sounds like a wonderful utopia, we know that these utopian promises never work out. Yeah, they promise free stuff from the government, and people go for it, and yet what these people fail to realize is that socialism typically results in starvation. And if you don't think that it can happen here in America, I invite you to ask your Uber driver about the current price of gas. Now, if you think that the current price of gas is bad, just wait until the rising cost of fuel and fertilizer results in higher prices at the grocery store. And not only that, but there does appear to be a perfect storm brewing, which could result in food shortages here in America. As a matter of fact, we're currently in the middle of a major drought, which is threatening the region's winter wheat crop. According to one report from AG Webb, more than half of Kansas was classified as under severe drought or worse as of March the 8th, the driest conditions since 2018, according to the National Drought Mitigation Center. Also, severe drought is also covering 3/4 of Oklahoma and more than 2/3 of Texas, both of which are also large wheat producers. And not only that, but listen, the winter wheat crop there in China is expected to be among the worst ever after heavy rainfall delayed planting. And seeing how China is the world's largest producer of wheat, well, we should not only expect the cost of wheat to rise, but wheat shortages should also be expected. Now, with all this being the case, I can't help but to remember the vision that John described in Revelation chapter 6. It's there where he declares that he opened the third seal. I heard the third living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed him, and power was given to them over 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. Now from this, we can see that the third and the fourth horsemen of the apocalypse, that these horses will result in a massive spike of inflation as shortages of wheat and barley begin to impact the global market, so people can't even afford, to feed themselves anymore. And then hungry people begin to turn on one another as food shortages result in rioting. Well, knowing that this vision will eventually be fulfilled after the rapture of the church, we must not forget that the Lord Jesus also assured us that the world would continue to experience famines in various places as we draw closer and closer to the day of Christ's return. And so if Jen Psaki is correct, and we're on the verge of global food shortages, then just take a moment to ask yourself, who's going to be in charge of the rations? Who's going to be in charge of rationing out the food that's left? And who will be shunned from the breadlines as these socialistic leaders began to engage in tyrannical lockdowns as they decide on who they're going to distribute the food to? I'm guessing that it's not going to work out well for Christians. Thankfully for us, though, born-again believers, we aren't trusting in the government. We're trusting in our Creator, who's able to provide us with everything that we need. And at the same time, though, we would do well to prayerfully ask the Lord for His direction. God can see the future in advance, and we need that wisdom now. We need to consider the current situation at hand and prayerfully ask the Lord to guide us into making good decisions. And I'll remind you, the Lord was the one who led Noah to stock up food for the flood as he built that boat and pulled the animals onto the ark and had the food that he needed to survive through that flood. And the Lord led Joseph to store up grain for the famine so that he and his family could eat. And in light of these examples, I would just point out that those who are being led by the Lord Jesus Christ, we don't need to be afraid of the future. We don't need to be afraid of the cost of wheat. We don't need to be afraid of food shortages. And the reason why is because the believer who is seeking the wisdom of the Lord will be given the guidance, the godly guidance that we need to prepare for the future. And with that being the case, I encourage you, let's continue walking by faith with the Lord Jesus Christ. And as we do, He will help us to fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.